There was a moment when you realized you weren't actually living. You were bracing. Every day, every conversation, every plan. You didn't wake up expecting joy. You woke up expecting impact, like someone who's learned that life doesn't announce when it's about to hit. So you stayed tense, alert, prepared for the worst, even on good days. There was a night when everything was quiet, no crisis, no bad news, no obvious threat, and yet your chest wouldn't loosen. Your mind kept scanning the dark like something was about to go wrong. You remember that feeling, lying there, heart racing for no clear reason, thinking, why can't I just rest when nothing is happening? From your side, it looked like anxiety. From heaven's side, it looked like a heart that learned peace was temporary. Somewhere along the way, you stopped believing calm was safe. You told yourself, if I relax, something bad will catch me off guard. So you stayed guarded. You learned how to enjoy things with one eye open. You laughed, but not too freely. You hoped, but not too deeply, because deep down you were waiting for the moment when it would all fall apart, and you thought that waiting made you wise. But God saw what it was really costing you. He saw how often your body was in survival mode, even when your life was not under attack. He saw how your thoughts kept racing ahead, trying to solve problems that didn't exist yet. He saw how peace kept knocking, and how fear kept answering the door. There was a reason for that. You weren't born this way. This posture was learned. It came from seasons when peace did get interrupted, from moments when things changed suddenly, from times when you trusted and got blindsided. Your nervous system never forgot. So now, even in safe places, your heart stayed tight, just in case. But heaven never designed you to live like this. You were not created to spend your life waiting for the next disaster. You were created to live from trust, not tension. And on that quiet night, when nothing was wrong but everything felt heavy, God began to speak, not loudly, not urgently, but gently, right into that braced place inside you. You don't have to live like something bad is always about to happen. I am here. I am watching. You are not unprotected. That sentence didn't erase the fear, but it interrupted it. For the first time, you considered a new possibility. What if peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of someone stronger than them? What if your heart doesn't have to stay in defensive mode to be safe? What if God is inviting you into a different frequency? Not the frequency of fear, not the frequency of anticipation, but the frequency of peace that guards your heart even when life is unpredictable. You didn't know how to live there yet. But that night, for the first time in a long time, you stopped bracing just for a breath and listened, and heaven stayed. You didn't realize how long you had been holding your breath until God invited you to exhale. Peace didn't arrive as a feeling at first. It arrived as a question. Why are you carrying tomorrow like it's already here? That question lingered. Because if you were honest, your mind spent very little time in the present moment. You were always a few steps ahead, replaying what might happen, what could go wrong, what you would do if it did. You told yourself this was wisdom, preparation, responsibility, but heaven called it something else. Burden. You were carrying weights that were never placed in your hands. You started to see it, how often you woke up already tired, not because of what you did yesterday, but because of everything you were already trying to manage about tomorrow. How your prayers had quietly shifted from trust to control. You didn't notice when it happened, but instead of saying, God, I trust you, your heart started saying, God, tell me exactly how this will turn out so I can finally relax. Peace was postponed until certainty arrived, and certainty never came, so rest stayed out of reach. God didn't scold you for this. He didn't say, why don't you have more faith? He said something softer. You're trying to protect yourself from pain by predicting it, but that's not protection, that's exhaustion. That truth landed gently, but it landed deep. You began to see how fear disguises itself as responsibility, how anxiety pretends to be foresight, how control dresses up like care, and how peace keeps getting rejected because it doesn't come with guarantees. But God never promised you a life without uncertainty. He promised you His presence inside it. That night, as you lay there thinking, you remembered a line you had read before but never really lived from. Cast all your cares on him because he cares for you. Not some of them, not the manageable ones. All. That word felt confrontational, because casting means throwing, releasing, letting go of the thing you've been gripping so tightly, and you weren't sure you knew how to do that, so you started small. You didn't try to fix your whole life. You just named what was heavy in that moment. This conversation tomorrow, this decision I keep replaying, this fear I can't silence. And one by one, you spoke them to God, not eloquently, not with spiritual polish, just honestly. Lord, this is too much for me. I don't know how it will turn out, and I'm tired of pretending that I do. You didn't feel peace rush in like a wave, but you felt something shift, like the weight had been acknowledged, like you weren't alone in carrying it anymore. From heaven's side, that mattered. Because peace doesn't begin when problems disappear. It begins when you stop pretending you were meant to handle them by yourself. You started to realize that peace is not passive. It's not ignoring reality. It's actively choosing where your trust will rest when reality feels unstable. And in that moment you chose, not perfectly, not permanently, but genuinely. I don't want to live bracing for impact anymore. I want to learn how to trust you in real time. That prayer wasn't dramatic, but it was decisive. From your side, it felt like weakness. From heaven's side, it was alignment. Your heart was beginning to tune itself away from fear's frequency and toward something deeper, stronger, steadier. The frequency of peace that doesn't require everything to make sense before it settles in. You began to notice how fear speaks, not loudly, not dramatically, but constantly. It whispers in the background while you're doing normal things, folding laundry, driving to work, standing in line, trying to fall asleep. What if this doesn't last? What if something happens? What if you lose this? What if it all falls apart again? Fear rarely announces itself as fear. It presents itself as concern, as logic, as caution. But God started helping you see the pattern. Fear never asked you to stay present. It always pulled you forward into imagined futures that hadn't arrived and might never arrive. And every time you followed it there, peace stayed behind. You remembered how Jesus spoke to his disciples, not when everything was calm, but in the middle of storms, persecution, uncertainty. Do not worry about tomorrow. Not because tomorrow doesn't matter, but because worrying about it won't add a single ounce of life, clarity, or protection. You realize something unsettling. Fear had convinced you that vigilance was the price of safety, that if you stopped scanning for danger, you would be irresponsible. But heaven began to reframe it. What if constant vigilance isn't faithfulness, but distrust? Not distrust of God's existence. You believed in that. Distrust of his care in the details. Distrust that he could be active without you supervising everything. That realization was uncomfortable, because it meant you had been living like peace was risky and anxiety was necessary. God didn't ask you to shut fear up by force. He asked you to test it. When fear speaks, ask it one question. Has this actually happened? Or am I borrowing pain from a future that doesn't exist yet? You tried it. The next time your chest tightened, you paused. This hasn't happened yet. The next time your mind raced, you named it. I'm imagining again. You weren't denying reality. You were refusing to live in a story that God hadn't written. And slowly, your body started to learn what your spirit already knew. That you are safest, not when you predict everything, but when you stay close to the one who sees everything. Peace didn't erase uncertainty. It repositioned you inside it. Instead of standing alone against tomorrow, you stood with God in today. And for the first time, today felt lighter. There was a shift when you realized that peace is not something you wait for. It's something you practice. For a long time, you told yourself, I'll have peace when this is resolved, when that decision is made, when the money is stable, when the relationship is clear, when I finally know what's going to happen. Peace was always scheduled for later. but later kept moving. And God, who never withholds peace as a reward, began to invite you into something radical. What if you learned to rest before the outcome? That felt dangerous, because resting before resolution felt like lowering your guard, and you had learned through experience that lowering your guard sometimes came with pain, so your heart resisted. How can I be calm when things are still uncertain? God answered without rushing you. Because I am certain, not the situation, not the people, not the timing, Him. You started to notice how often your peace was tied to external control. If people behaved predictably, you felt safe. If plans stayed intact, you felt calm. If answers came quickly, you could breathe. But the moment something shifted, peace evaporated. God wasn't condemning that. He was revealing it. Because peace that depends on everything going right is fragile by design. He was offering you a different kind. Peace that doesn't panic when variables change. Peace that doesn't collapse when control slips. Peace that anchors itself not to outcomes, but to presence. You began to experiment with this in small ways. When a message went unanswered, you resisted the urge to fill the silence with fear. Instead, you said, "Lord, you are here in this pause. I don't know what it means yet, but I refuse to assign it a worst-case story." When a plan fell through and disappointment rose, you acknowledged it, without spiraling. "This hurts. I didn't want this change, but I trust that you are not confused by this turn. I choose to stay present instead of bracing." These weren't grand declarations. They were quiet interruptions to old habits. And every time you interrupted fear, peace had a little more room to settle. You noticed something else too. Your body began to follow your choices. Your shoulders dropped more often. Your jaw unclenched. Your breathing slowed without you forcing it. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped meeting every unknown as a threat. God was retraining your nervous system, teaching it that safety does not come from certainty, but from closeness. From staying aware that you are not navigating this life alone, that someone stronger than your fears is actively involved in your days. Peace wasn't something you had to chase anymore. It was something you returned to again and again by choosing trust in the middle of unfinished stories. And each time you did, your heart tuned itself a little more clearly to the frequency of peace. The kind that doesn't wait for everything to settle, but settles because God is already there. You started to see that peace is closely tied to where your attention lives. For a long time, your attention stayed on what might go wrong, the one loose thread, the unanswered question, the variable you couldn't control. Even in moments of blessing, your eyes kept drifting toward the edge, searching for the flaw that could undo everything. God didn't accuse you of ingratitude. He showed you something gentler. Your heart has learned to look for danger before it looks for me. That sentence landed quietly, but it explained so much. You realized how rarely you pause to notice God's nearness in ordinary moments. The calm of a morning, the safety of your drive home, the simple fact that you made it through another day. Peace was present, but fear had trained you not to see it. So God began to retrain your focus, not by asking you to deny what was hard, but by inviting you to notice what was steady. You started small. When anxiety rose, instead of arguing with it, you looked for God's presence right where you were. A breath that came easier, a verse that surfaced without effort, a sense of being held even when nothing changed outwardly. You began to understand that peace grows where attention is placed, not because problems disappear, but because God becomes more real than the problems. You also noticed how much noise had been shaping your inner world. Constant updates, endless opinions, worst-case headlines. Your soul was never designed to carry the weight of the whole world's fear. So you started creating space, not isolation, not avoidance, but intentional quiet, moments where you stepped back from the noise and allowed your mind to remember what it feels like to be anchored. In those quieter moments, peace spoke more clearly, not as a rush of emotion, but as a steady reminder. You are here, you are safe right now, and God is not absent. You began to see that peace doesn't shout. It doesn't compete for your attention. It waits, patient, constant, ready to settle the moment fear stops talking over it. This wasn't about becoming detached or careless. You still planned, you still prepared, you still showed wisdom. But you stopped letting every piece of information have equal authority over your heart. You learned to ask, is this drawing me closer to trust or pulling me deeper into tension? And slowly, your choices followed. You guarded what you consumed. You guarded how much you replayed worst-case stories. You guarded the tone of your inner dialogue, because you were beginning to value peace, not as a luxury, but as a sacred space where God meets you. And as you protected that space, peace stopped feeling fragile. It started to feel like something rooted, not in circumstances, but in the quiet confidence that no matter what unfolds, you are not facing it without God. That awareness didn't remove all fear, but it changed who had the final word. Fear could speak, but peace decided whether you listened. There came a moment when God showed you that peace is not something you force your way into. It's something you return to, because fear will still knock, even after all this. Even when you've learned how to breathe again, even when your life is objectively calmer, fear doesn't disappear just because you've grown. It tests. It revisits old doors to see if they're still unlocked. And one day, it knocked again. Not dramatically, subtly. A thought, a memory, a familiar tightening in your chest. For a split second, your body responded the old way, bracing, preparing, running the scenarios. But this time you noticed it sooner. You didn't judge yourself. You didn't panic. You simply said, I know this feeling. I don't live here anymore. That sentence mattered, because before, fear felt like home. Now, it felt like a visitor. You began to understand that peace is not the absence of anxious thoughts. It's the ability to recognize them without obeying them. God never promised you would never feel afraid. He promised you would never be alone inside that fear. So instead of fighting the sensation, you practiced something new. You brought fear into God's presence instead of trying to outrun it. Lord, this old alarm is going off again. My body remembers things my mind already knows you've healed. I don't need you to make this disappear instantly. I just need you to stay with me while it passes. And he did. Not always by changing how you felt right away, but by anchoring you so the feeling didn't carry you away. You noticed how fear lost strength when it wasn't resisted or rehearsed. It came, it spoke, and then it left, because peace had learned how to stay. This changed how you saw yourself. You stopped saying, I'm an anxious person. You then started saying, I'm a person learning how to stay with God when anxiety shows up. That shift was deeply freeing. It meant fear was no longer your identity. It was simply a signal, a reminder to come back to presence, to breathe, to ground, to trust. You also realized how often you tried to solve your way into peace, as if the right answer, the perfect plan, the full explanation would finally let you rest. But peace doesn't live on the other side of answers. It lives on the other side of surrender. The moment you stop saying, I need to understand everything before I can relax, and start saying, I trust you enough to rest without knowing everything. That's when peace moves from theory to reality. You were learning to live with open hands, not careless hands, trusting hands, hands that do their part, then release the outcome, hands that pray, then rest, hands that plan, then let God lead. And the more you lived like that, the more your heart recognized peace, not as something fragile that could shatter at any moment, but as something resilient, a steady undercurrent that remained even when waves passed over it. This was not the peace you once imagined. It wasn't loud, it wasn't euphoric, it was quiet, stable, faithful, the kind of peace that doesn't need everything to be okay in order to stay. The kind of peace that knows even if something does go wrong, you will not face it alone. And slowly, that knowing began to change how you walked through your days. Less braced, less guarded, more present, more grounded, more aware that safety has never come from predicting pain, but from staying close to the God who walks with you through whatever comes next. You began to notice how peace started showing up in places you never expected it to, not just in prayer, not just in quiet moments, but in the middle of ordinary life, in conversations that used to make you tense, in decisions that once kept you awake at night, in situations where your instinct was to brace, to overthink, to prepare for disappointment. Now there was space between the moment and your reaction, a pause, and in that pause, peace had room to speak. You realized that peace is not passive. It doesn't numb you. It sharpens you. Without hardening you, you could feel concern without panic. You could feel sadness without collapse. You could feel uncertainty without losing your footing. That was new. Before, any strong emotion felt like a threat. Now, emotions felt like information, not commands. You didn't have to obey every fear just because it showed up. You also began to see how peace changed your relationships. You listened more. You interrupted less. You didn't rush to defend yourself at every misunderstanding. Because peace made you less reactive. You no longer needed every moment to prove that you were safe. You trusted that God was already holding what mattered most. That trust softened your posture. People felt it. You became someone others could breathe around, not because you had answers, but because you weren't leaking anxiety into every space you entered. You noticed it in how you handled conflict. Before, conflict felt like danger, a sign something was about to break. Now, it felt like a moment that required wisdom, not fear. You could stay present without escalating. You could speak truth without sharpening it into a weapon. Peace didn't make you silent, it made you clear. You also noticed how peace began to influence your expectations. You stopped assuming the worst outcome was the most realistic one, not because you became naive, but because you stopped letting fear write the ending before God had finished the story. You learned to say, "I don't know how this will go, but I know who walks with me into it." That sentence became an anchor. You said it before meetings, before conversations, before sleep, and each time your body followed your faith, your shoulders loosened, your breathing deepened. Peace was teaching you that your nervous system can learn trust too. That faith is not only a belief, it's a posture, a way of inhabiting the moment without constantly reaching for control. You also realized how much of your life had been lived one step ahead, always planning what you would do if something went wrong. Now, you were learning to live here, in today's grace, in today's strength, in today's portion. Jesus once said, "Each day has enough trouble of its own." You finally understood what he meant, not as a warning but as permission. Permission to stop borrowing stress from days you haven't lived yet. Peace didn't promise that trouble wouldn't come. It promised that you don't have to face it early. And as you practiced that day by day, you felt something rare settle in your chest, a quiet confidence that no matter what unfolds, you will meet it with God, not alone, not braced, not panicked, but present. That is what peace was building in you, not a bubble, not denial, but a deep, steady trust that lets you walk forward without living as if impact is inevitable. There came a moment when you realized peace was no longer something you were chasing. It was something you were carrying, not perfectly, not constantly, but genuinely. You noticed it in the way your mornings felt. Before, you woke up already tense, already running the list of everything that could go wrong. Now, you woke up aware of your breath, aware of the quiet, aware that nothing was demanding your fear in that first moment. You started your day by returning to God instead of rushing past him. Not always with words, sometimes just with a silent acknowledgement, "You're here, so I don't have to rush." That simple awareness changed the tone of your whole day. Peace also began to guard your mind when unexpected things happened. A sudden change, a disappointing update, a moment that didn't go the way you hoped. You still felt it, but it didn't hijack you. You noticed the reflex, the urge to spiral, to catastrophize, to jump 10 steps ahead. and you gently stopped yourself. This is one moment, not the whole story. That sentence became a boundary. It kept fear from turning a chapter into a verdict. You also began to see how peace affected your sense of time. Fear always rushed you. Decide now. Fix this immediately. Don't wait. Don't pause. Peace slowed you down. It reminded you that God is not panicked, that nothing in your life is happening faster than his ability to respond. So you gave yourself permission to move at a human pace, to think before reacting, to pray before deciding, to sleep instead of overworking your mind. That permission felt holy. You also noticed how peace changed the way you interpreted silence. Before, silence meant danger. Now, it often meant space. Space for God to work without you interfering, space for clarity to arrive without being forced, space for things to unfold instead of being controlled. You didn't fill every pause with anxiety anymore. Sometimes you simply waited, and waiting no longer felt like neglect. It felt like trust. You also realized that peace made you more discerning. Fear reacts. Peace listens. Fear rushes to conclusions. Peace asks better questions. You became slower to label situations as threats, slower to assume motives, slower to punish yourself for not having everything figured out. That slowness didn't weaken you, it strengthened you, because clarity lives where panic does not. You also noticed how peace affected your body in subtle ways. Your sleep became deeper, your appetite more steady, your tension headaches less frequent. Not because stress vanished, but because you were no longer fighting every sensation as if it meant danger. Your body was learning what your spirit already knew. That safety is not the absence of uncertainty, but the presence of God's care. And maybe the most surprising part was this. You began to enjoy the present moment without waiting for the next shoe to drop. You laughed without checking for consequences. You rested without guilt. You experienced joy without immediately asking how long it would last. That was new, that was healing. Peace had begun to untangle joy from fear, and heaven smiled, because this was always the life God intended for you. Not a life without challenges, but a life where your heart doesn't live in a constant state of anticipation, where trust is not theoretical, but practiced, moment by moment, and where peace is no longer something you wait for at the end of the storm, but something you carry with you right through it. There was a day when you realized how far you had come by the way your heart responded to something unexpected. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but differently. Something didn't go as planned. A message came later than expected. A door stayed closed longer than you wanted, and for a moment, the old reflex showed up. That quick tightening, that familiar urge to brace yourself, to prepare for disappointment. But instead of spiraling, you paused. You noticed the fear without letting it drive. You didn't shame yourself for feeling it. You simply acknowledged it and turned your attention back to God. Lord, you see this. You're not surprised, and you're still with me. That prayer wasn't loud, but it was grounded. And in that grounding, you realized something important. Peace had become your default return point. Not fear, not control, not overthinking, peace. You started to see how often God had been faithful in moments you once assumed would break you, situations you thought you wouldn't survive, conversations you dreaded, uncertainties that felt unbearable at the time. You made it through them, not because you predicted them well, but because God met you inside them. That realization reshaped how you looked at the future. Instead of asking, "What if I can't handle this?" you began asking, "What if God will meet me there like he always has?" That question didn't erase fear, but it softened it. Fear no longer sounded like a final authority. It sounded like a reminder to stay close. You also noticed how peace changed your internal language. You stopped saying, "I can't deal with this," and started saying, "I don't have to deal with this alone." You stopped assuming that difficulty meant abandonment. You began to recognize that God's presence often feels quiet, not because he is absent, but because he is steady. That steadiness became something you leaned into. When your mind tried to rush ahead, you brought it back. This moment is enough. When your thoughts tried to rehearse imaginary outcomes, you interrupted them. That's not happening right now. You weren't suppressing fear. You were refusing to let it borrow power from a future that wasn't here yet. Peace taught you how to stay human, to feel concern without letting it turn into panic, to plan without obsessing, to care without carrying what was never yours to hold. You also began to see how much energy fear had been stealing from your life. Energy you now had back, for creativity, for connection, for laughter, for noticing beauty instead of scanning for danger. That energy felt like freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from the constant weight of self-protection. God was teaching you that He is a better protector than anxiety ever was. That lesson settled deep. You didn't need to live braced to be safe. You needed to stay connected. And the more you lived from that connection, the more peace stopped feeling like something that could vanish at any second and started feeling like something rooted, something resilient, something that could hold you even when life shifted. You weren't finished learning, but you were no longer lost. You were walking forward with a heart that knew where to return when fear tried to take the lead. That knowledge was changing everything. There will come a moment when you look back at how you used to live and realize how much of your life was spent bracing for impact. Not because something was always wrong, but because your heart had learned to expect that it might be. You lived alert, tense, prepared. You called it being strong, but God knew how tired it made you. He knew you weren't meant to spend your days guarding yourself from a future that hadn't arrived yet. And quietly, without forcing you, without shaming you, He taught you something different. He showed you that peace is not the absence of trouble. It is the presence of trust. Trust that does not demand to see the whole map before taking the next step. Trust that does not panic when plans change. Trust that knows even if something breaks, you will not, because you will not face it alone. You will remember the nights when your chest used to tighten for no clear reason, when your mind ran ahead of your life, borrowing fear from tomorrow. And you will notice how different it feels now, not because fear never shows up, but because it no longer runs the house. You have learned what to do when it knocks. You pause, you breathe, you return. You return to the God who has never left you. You return to the present moment where grace is always enough. You return to the truth that you are held, not by your vigilance, not by your planning, but by His faithfulness. Peace has become your home base, not a fragile calm that shatters under pressure, but a deep steadiness that stays even when waves pass through. You move through life now less guarded, less rushed, less reactive, more present, more grounded, more aware that safety has never come from predicting pain, but from trusting the one who walks with you through it. And on the days when the old instinct returns, when your shoulders tighten, when your thoughts speed up, when you feel the urge to brace again, you will remember. You don't live there anymore. You don't have to earn peace. You don't have to chase it. You simply return to the presence where it was always waiting. This is the frequency of peace. Not a feeling you force, but a way of living where your heart is anchored in God instead of anticipation, where your mind is trained to stay here instead of running ahead, where your soul rests in the truth that no matter what unfolds, you are seen, you are guided, you are protected, and you are never walking into tomorrow alone. And if there are moments when life feels heavy again, when fear tries to reclaim old ground, you are welcome to come back here, to this space, to this reminder, to this quiet voice speaking peace over your story. If this spoke to something deep inside your heart, you are welcome to stay close to divine frequency. Let this be a place you return to when your chest feels tight, when your thoughts race, when you need to remember that in God's presence you don't have to brace, you can rest.